director on an upcoming comedy series out of Pocket. And currently, she's broadening her horizons and working on her music video production stage. She's in the development stages of several projects. So, with that, I'd like to welcome our three panelists and begin with a question on what inspired your respective works, what got you into filmmaking. Start from there. So we can begin with Eli and work on it then.
Who's going to read your background? Man, this man inspired me by any other name. Like, yeah, tell us a bit about
as I've said many times today. And one of the films I've actually was by any other name, Inspiration of Afro-Amerindian Heritage. And it was a documentary that kind of inspired this symposium. And so it dealt with the intersection of African American and Native American life in the South and the genealogy of the Southeast United States. And specifically, I used my own family history as a framework for understanding that, particularly side of my family that is actually kind of lost to us in many ways. And so, you know, and a lot of it took place in Georgia. My family originally, we were from Philadelphia, but by way of, in part, Georgia. So we were kind of unpacking some of the history of Georgia genealogy, the history of slavery in the South, as well as Native American involvement in slavery on multiple ends of that spectrum, and the outcome of the African American experience. So that kind of led into or rolled into Dividing Lines, which is why I invited you guys here to talk. So yeah, so definitely, Eli, what got you into filmmaking initially?
Representation, for sure. Just not seeing my experience in front of me, whether it be the books we're taught through in school or the movies or the TV that we watch. So my mom bought a digital 8 camera in high school, and my brother was a photographer. I was like, I'm gonna do something different than photography. And I just took that digital 8 camera like it was my own, and I took it around the world. And the first documentary that I made, I brought it to Cuba, and I came back home and started showing people Cuban hip hop. And what? This is in Cuba, and you know, we've been taught so many different things of Cuba that people that were interested in. And I thought, okay, this is going to be my first project. And once you make a film, you can call yourself a filmmaker.
So yeah, I've always really been into storytelling. When I was younger, I wanted to go to screenwriting originally, and then I realized that the movies, like I realized that the screenwriter isn't the one who makes the movie. I didn't want anyone to mess up my film, so I was like, I guess I have to learn how to direct. And so from there, I wanted to do directing into LA. So yeah, and also representation for sure, because I realized that a lot of the people that I saw in film and movies and TV didn't look like me, didn't tell the stories I wanted to tell. And I realized there's so many interesting stories in Black history that aren't taught at all. And I'm like, why are we telling these other stories that are like made up sci-fi fake? And when we have our own stories that are incredible, that I wanted to be able to tell
But for me, somewhat the same way, I always enjoyed sitting down with my elders, just having conversations. Maybe not because my grandmother she had 14 siblings. She was 15. And so I was always around my aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, and just to hear all the rich stories about sharecropping, about institutional slavery, about all these difficult times. And I'm looking at them like, well, y'all are a resilient group of 14 kids because how were you able to survive X, Y, and Z? So for me, I originally started doing an oral history project. And I'm like, people deserve to see these individual spaces. So at that point, I was able to link up with Andrew Smith, who was my videographer, and we traveled throughout the South, capturing these stories of individuals that I felt were influential to everyone because they were quote unquote everyday people. It wasn't anyone famous or anything like that. They were just regular people. I felt like the world needs to see more of themselves, regular people, in order to be inspired. So that's why I could got into it.
So what inspired your current projects that you're working on? I know that Frederick, you have a project coming out, and we're screening Paisley and Levi's works as well. But what actually inspired that specifically? And particularly, I'm aiming this more towards Paisley and Frederick because I just had my own interest in terms of subject matter of like binary and name. I was actually kind of curious as how do we handle subject matter like that, taking the building of family history, some of the harder stories of African Americans.
So I guess I was told the story of Catherine, who was my great-great-great-grandmother, who was an enslaved woman in Barbados. I was told that story when I was like maybe middle school by my great aunt, and she told me about Catherine and how basically because Catherine decided not to take any money from the man who raped her, and because that was very common, enslaved women would usually be given land and everything like that because a lot of the British were leaving the island at the time. So they wanted to use to sell their land and everything. And the land that was kind of like the bad land, they would give to the children of their biracial children. And so William Byrace, who was my great-great-great-grandfather, attempted to give his last name and everything to Catherine and her son, but she didn't want to take it. And I really thought about that decision because that decision impacted everything. Like I wouldn't be born if that she would make that decision, because if she would have stayed, if she would have kept the money or taken money and land, they would have had no reason to, my family, to leave Barbados and come to America in search for a better life and everything. And so I thought about that decision a lot and how like that was a really strong decision that she made, because it showed that she like believed in herself and believed in her own abilities to raise her child, and she was she was a very strong woman from that decision. So I really wanted to, when I decided to like go into this documentary program, I wanted to think about what story I could tell, and like I have this opportunity to tell this amazing story, to tell stories in general, and I felt like I almost owed it to her to tell this story because she didn't have that voice and I do now. And so yeah, that's basically what inspired me to make this film. I feel like just to, yeah, I almost feel like I know Catherine in a way because it was a very like spiritual experience during all that. I did a lot of praying and everything like that, and talking to family members and just realizing that their hard work, it means something and it has to mean something, and that's what I'm here to do.
So I was at Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum and Historical Site, which is in Gainesville, North Carolina, and I was screening the American South as we know it. And after after the screenings, I gave a presentation titled "Utilizing Film to Better Understand Historical Trauma in the African American Community." So after I did that, there was this older white lady that came up to me after everyone had left. She left too, and then she came back in. And she came up and said, "Do you mind if I speak with you?" And I said, "No, not at all." And she stared at me for a second. She started crying. I'm like, "What did I say?" You know, I wouldn't, you know, what I said was what I said. But, you know, I was like, okay, let me try to be empathetic and hear out what she says. So she had talked about the cruelty of things that happened during Jim Crow. And then she disclosed to me that in Greensboro, she went to Greensboro Women's College, I believe is what the name was. She was doing sit-ins as well as picketing. So her friends who were African American could shop in department stores and things like that. A lot of people in Greensboro knows about the Woolworth stores, but there were multiple different movements in Greensboro. And she sat there and she says, you know, humanity is such an awful place, and just goes on. So I felt it was really catharsis for her, you know, for her to be able to get that out. And so I'm looking at her and I'm trying to stay focused. I'm like, man, this would be a good follow-up to the documentary. And I said, well, do you mind if I put a camera in your face while you say all this stuff all over again? And she waited. She didn't give me a no, but I said, let's exchange emails. exchanged emails, and a week later she said, yes, I'll do it. So it just kind of happened with regards to the follow-up, the trailer that some of you all may have seen. And then from there, I went into Native American communities, other white communities, African American communities, trying to grapple with understanding what race is or is not, and how it has affected us over a span of different generations, also a span of different demographics as well. So that's what kind of inspired me, was just like trying to get into the headspace of individuals that look just like you and I, that may not look like you and I, can see exactly how this thing has impacted us for centuries and centuries, generations and generations. So that's kind of what prompted it.
And switching gears a little bit, Eli, when filming about Oso, did you experience on the production end any level of pushback or any kind of dynamic in relation to the racial dynamics in the community? And did you kind of experience that or kind of see that reflected on the process?
So I would say that the film definitely comes from my upbringing too. Puerto Rican, I'm raised in California, and so I say I was caught between the Mexican and Black on the left side of the map. We're much like Caribbean folks, and so it was a way to say that there are Black Latinos, and so Cuban hip hop was a way to do that. And from there, I went to Ghana, West Africa, and I did a film out there about hip life music, highlighting hip hop. And when I was looking for funding for that film, they fund the exact same stories all the time. It's like Civil War, or is it? And like, no, it's Ghana. What are you talking about? Or like the orphan story. And so I never got funding for that one. And Baco, so I would say the exact same thing. Like I went up and down the funding for film, the circle is so small. It's like you're applying to the same people. And so zero funding, bro, zero. And so again, me and my brother said, we're gonna tell the story anyway, it's not gonna stop us. And we went and told the story. And because of where the world is at today, I feel like it's been received a lot better than my earlier work, just kind of the change in time. Now, you have an Afro-Latino festival. That didn't exist. But, maybe it's 3 years old, I believe. So, yeah, I think the world is in a place of a bigger understanding, and that's why dividing lines could exist now, and we could talk about the complexities of our identity.
Just to add on to that as well, like, as I told you earlier, I lived in Puerto Rico for quite some time. That's my childhood in part, between that and Philadelphia. So, living on that island, one of the things I realized quickly was like, oh, I could look Puerto Rican too. I thought they just looked like this, and then, and some Puerto Ricans look even darker than me. And that threw me, because when you turn on the TV, when you turn to the Spanish channels, you saw something that looked wildly different all the time from what you would see when you went out to Fajardo. And so, like, I was kind of thrown off by that. And so I was kind of wondering, too, when it comes to Afrobeat, that seems more connected to the continent of Africa and African identity. Are others receptive to that as much, in terms of, well, of course, Afro-Latinos will be more receptive to it possibly than others, but do you see that as kind of like everybody's accepting of this African identity, being a part of their culture, or not?
Man, that's a dissertation.
Yeah.
I would say, to a certain extent, it's they would take the cool part of it, like cool to be Black in America or something like that. But all the, they're not down to tear down the structure of white supremacy, or or fight against racism. So I think we got a lot of work to do. The system's been in place for a long time to say what stories get to be told and how those stories are told. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to change that. And it's gonna have to happen outside of the system, I believe, because I've hit my head against the glass ceiling so much that the only real way that I see forward and from the people around me is doing it yourself. Like, they're not gonna fund something that literally is gonna take them down.
Right.
So, Paisley, in regards to descendants, one of the interesting aspects of your film, I thought, was this notion of reconciliation and the perspective I received from that as well. So, you know, as somebody who's really into genealogy myself, coming across, you know, cousins that are on the other end of the gene pool, you know, and the only way that you're relating to each other is through, you know, these tragic circumstances and these really oppressive and, you know, foreign circumstances. Relating to one another under that umbrella of like, oh crap, like all this stuff that's kind of sitting on top of you, both of you, does that cloud your ability to connect? And what is your experience with that? What's your opinion on that regarding your project?
Yeah, that was hard. It was also hard because I don't think she fully got how we were related at first. Like, it was actually her husband who really said, like, we were all at dinner in her house, and she goes, "Oh, I didn't really see your great-great-great-grandmother listed on the ancestry as William's wife or anything. I'm really confused." And then her husband goes, "Don't you understand, Philippa? She was right." And she was like, "Oh dear, that's not good at all." And I'm like, "No, it's not." And so I think like that right there shows how different the worldviews were. Because when I came into that, I knew what was going on. I had started already like really thinking about what that means for me and what that means for my family. But it was just like she didn't even really think she could ever have to think about that. And so we had to first get on that same page. Like, this is what happened. It's like we don't know, we really don't know what happened, but I mean, history points us to what happened. And I think the course of me, the whole course of me talking to her, she was her realization of that. So I don't think she ever she didn't get it until the end. And so I think a lot of that before was, when we first met, we talked about, you know, random other things, just things to like get on the same page as humans, you know, connecting. But I think it was very much a process of her realizing what happened, and for me realizing that I don't think that I'll ever, like, the closure doesn't exist in that sense. And so I think we both were realizing two different things over the process of the film.
I sort of was kind of curious about this idea of silence. So, like, you know, in terms of perspectives, minority films, minority filmmakers are often silenced externally. But then also there's a level of self-silence that goes on as well, right? So when it comes to your interactions with your cousin, was there an element of self-censorship that you displayed? Yep. And then was there an element of silence that you were getting from her? Because the first thing I thought when I saw your film was like, well, how'd you get them to talk to you? Yeah. And is that even a thing that can happen across the board for people, or is that rarity? Were you kind of the exception to the rule?
Yeah, I think when you see the film, I talk about how I'm upset with myself because I felt like I was too nice during it, but I kind of see that I think I had to be nice to like get through, like, you know, to be able to have that conversation, because I think it is. I don't really know why she decided to talk to me. I reached out to her through, like, I found her on Ancestry.com, and then I just sent her a message. She's like, "Can we talk on the phone?" And she was like, "Sure." And we talk, and yeah, I definitely think that I was kind of beating around the bush because it's such a hard subject to get to. I said like we were related through William Fireplace, so I kind of was a white man, so I kind of thought that she might put two and two together. But then when I got there, I think we had like our conversation was pretty long, and I think at first I was kind of like self-censoring a little bit. I had like what I wanted to talk about, but it was sometimes really hard to bring those things up because I wanted her to understand that I'm not mad at her after she herself didn't do anything, you know? And that's not what it's about. I think in her mind, she thought that's what the route was going towards, and then she even brought up some stuff about hinting that I was trying to get money from her or something. But so I think that I was definitely self-censoring in a way earlier in the conversation because I wasn't sure. I didn't want to, you know, speak for her or anything. But then, and I think that she also was constantly shifting the conversation away from what we were talking about. There's at a point in the interview where she starts talking about like science fiction movies and stuff. I think we're getting away from the topic. But yeah, I think it's hard to talk about these things, but that's just because our society doesn't make it a place where we can talk about it. And like we have to make these we have to keep having the conversations in order for them to get easier to have. And so just even like for myself, learning to not be afraid to say what I want to say about certain things.
Further, because most of your work deals with this idea of reconciliation. So when we're talking about reconciliation, especially because you tend to interview elders of communities, there tends to be that other element of silence or silence or censorship in that way. And in part because, you know, some of those conversations probably couldn't even happen like without a direct response on a physical level by the society at large. So, you know, stuff that Paisley was talking about, her film, for instance, we're not talking about that. Otherwise, you know, that could be somebody's life at stake. And so this idea of us discussing it openly amongst each other or to the public or even on this kind of forum, this is actually fairly new. And I would say probably within our parents' lifetimes, respectively. So how do you address that when you start getting pushback from elders within our communities or outside of our respective communities? Dealing with that concept of like, well, you know, I've only been comfortable talking about this for 15 years. And you're basically trying to have like a full-on 2-hour conversation in front of the camera with the person who was around for 15 years. So how do you address that?
You know, I'm a straight shooter. I think that who we have in the office of the presidency right now has helped with this. I think people are empowered from the perspective of carrying on the flag of white supremacy. I think that you have more individuals that are ready to kind of talk about everything that has directly affected them based on white supremacy. So to be honest with you, with the individuals that we've interviewed, everyone has been absolutely forthcoming with everything. We interviewed the son of an enslaved individual in Clarksville, Virginia, which is Mecklenburg County, Virginia. His name is Mr. George Sizemore. Mr. George Sizemore was 101 years old, and he was 13 years old when his father passed. So he had 13 years of living with his formerly enslaved father, right? So he got this rich information. And I think that it's relationship building. Usually with all the subjects, I always talk with them, usually months in advance. It's never I need you know, I don't present an opportunity and then I'm out, right? I mean, I talk for months before everything even kicks off to get them in a space where they feel comfortable. Because some of these individuals, it may have been 30 years before they even had these conversations, long time before they had these conversations. So I think that if we didn't have the current state of the world, which Eli was talking about earlier, that would be more difficult. But I think people are fed up, people are tired, and it doesn't matter what age they are. And that's why the new documentary is over expanded different generations, have younger individuals as well, because people have things they want to say. And they're not going to hold anything back because other people are holding things back with regards to how they're reacting to certain situations, such as the Mother Emanuel AME. You know, he didn't hold any clips back. He let them all go. What happened in Charlottesville? He didn't pump the brakes. He kept going. So I think that people are at the space now, mentally and emotionally and spiritually, where they're just like, they got to get this stuff off. So it's really a good time personally to sit down with individuals and have these conversations. So if there's anything I can say about this administration, I think it has fostered this type of reaction with regards to individuals being vocal about their lives. That's the only credit I'm giving.
For the sake of time, we're going to open up for questions from the audience. Do we have any questions for any of our three filmmakers?
Hello, you guys. My question is for all of you guys. After seeing your film, and going through all the interviews that you guys have done, what was the inspiration that you found out of that? What did it give for you? What did you find from within that you can now take and tell us about in your work?
So what it gave me is definitely more of a sense of, like how you were saying, like to be able to speak up more, because yeah, like how you were just saying, like I think the world is set up. I think it's also like what it showed me is how intergenerational trauma works and intergenerational justice, because I do feel like for what the biggest takeaway was, like for my family, that really on a personal side really like it brought our family together in a way. It was really great, and in a way that there was a sense of like justice, a sense of handling and figuring out issues and everything. And what it taught me is to be unafraid to do that, because we have to do that. Like I genuinely believe that like our ancestors worked through us all the time, and that their sacrifices, their hard work, and everything can be seen today through everybody, and we can either choose to do something with their hard work or not. And it inspired me to keep going and to keep doing and wanting to make more films and tell not just my own story, but other people's stories, because not everybody is a filmmaker, not everyone's going to be a filmmaker. But yeah, the biggest takeaway was just to be, I would say, unapologetic in the way that I view the world and my stories and my family's stories.
Takeaway for me was, for one, is how strong the human spirit is, but then also how traumatized the Southern nation is. That's across the board. I don't care what color you are. Trauma is just lodged deeply into a lot of individuals based on the experiences. It doesn't matter, black, white, Latino, Latina, Hispanic. It just doesn't matter. And then trauma, it has been perpetuated based on the system of racism, which race is really nothing. If you really look at the history of race, it really wasn't a thing. It was made to be a thing, to incorporate this aspect of superiority, right? So when you go around in these different communities and sitting down across from these individuals from multiple different ethnic backgrounds, I'm just looking at a traumatized person. And the only way that those persons can be healed is, one, you have forums like this that are safe for people to be able to say what it is they need to say. And then for two, following up with each other and saying, how can I be supportive of you, or involving yourself in something, or start a grassroots effort into doing something. Like Eli said earlier, it's not going to come from an institutional thing. It has to be grassroots. It's just not, the institutions do not benefit from erasing some of the negative things that have happened in the past that we may deem negative, but they're still prospering off of, right? So for me, it is the aspect of understanding that there are way more traumatized people walking around right now that are behaving in such an unconscious way that they don't even know it, based on things that have happened historically in their lives, or people that they may have known, right? So for me, that's what I'm taking away.
I would say that it's an honor to be here around so many amazing filmmakers and documentarians. I believe that this field has been usually it's like extractive. People come and like tell stories and get rich off of them, and they don't invest in the communities. And I think what you created here is just storytelling, and that's sustainable and regenerative and healing, as you're saying. And when you're invested in the story, so I'm interviewing the abuela. I don't know, some of y'all saw the film. I'm interviewing his grandma, and where, you know, I'm not even sure if we could go into the room where the ceremony is about to happen. I'm ready for her to be like, hey, cameras off, we're about to do the thing because it's real. And she invites us all in, and the time comes where they do the prayer, and then she's like, all right, stand up. You know, we're not doing, this isn't for the camera. This is, you're in the prayer space, everybody's getting, and so everybody on the crew gets the limpieza and gets a reading, and it's just how it's done. So that's, for me, the biggest takeaway is like, this is real life, and respect it, come with humbleness, and learn. We're here to learn.
Hello, my name is Napoleon. I am a fellow storyteller and creative. I had a question for the panel, specifically for the gentleman in the pink shirt. And I know you going overseas, wherever you go, it would be hard for you. It's a knowledge gap as far as when we go into the past, or like when we go to a different culture. Like hip hop might be a little bit different. So it's like, where are you pulling your cues from? Or the knowledge gap. Because I know I've spoken with my grandmother before. And when she was young, at 5, she didn't know who the president was. That didn't even matter. But now, that's a 5-year-old who's the president. And no matter what administration, not if it was Trump or Obama, like a 5-year-old, oh, the president is this person. So how do y'all address and how do y'all address gaps like that in your stories that you tell? So that's kind of like what I wanted to know. That's a great question.
So for me, yeah, you're right. I think during some people's time period, it didn't matter who was at the head, right? And I think some people might feel that way now, right? I think through doing research, though, and identifying things that historically were happening during that time period, in order to kind of refresh the minds of these individuals. Like, for instance, when we talk about JFK and death of Martin Luther King, right? So I may approach it from the aspect of we lost some great leaders, right, that were fighting for equality or equity, right? So can you name some of those individuals, right? So, and I hope I'm answering your question as best as I can. So let's jog that memory and kind of go down that lane and see, okay, what do you remember about these individuals? Oh, well, they were all, vying for the exact same things. So that's something that's in common, right? And from that generational standpoint, I look at things that, okay, well, if that was the case and what that was going on then, if this person was the president, right? How was that different from when you were younger, right? Whether you were doing sharecropping, whether your family was a prominent business owner, et cetera, and you just try to find some type of middle ground to get them to an aspect to where they can just jog their memory. And again, I hope I'm answering this right, to where they can say, oh, well, yeah, and then, yeah, right? Because when you sit down and you ask people questions, sometimes it's more work. You got to do way more work in order to be able to pull out of these individuals what it is that they need. So it's always kind of backdooring certain things to be able to get that information out, even though they may not off the gate remember it or be able to answer it for you. And then hopefully that eventually will mean something. And then even if it's something to where you get a specific year and I research it and I say, well, Grandma, this president was there. Oh, yeah. But that was the same time that the Tuskegee thing went down and this and that. So it wasn't good. So, sometimes we got to do the work ourselves to be able to bridge that gap generationally for them that may have slipped through, because they may have just been in survival mode. And it just didn't matter, because the only thing they knew was that they had to get up and chop tobacco that morning. And that's just what life was like on a daily basis. So I think we have a good responsibility. We have a responsibility of bringing that to the forefront for them to bring it over to the unconscious, to the conscious. If it even resonates with them at that, they may just be like, that was then, I ain't even on that, it's a wrap. Next question, please.
I still want to hear, like, as far as like the indicators, because if it's a music coming from somewhere, like, or even I could think of New York hip hop versus Southern hip hop. Southern hip hop has its own cues that came from New York hip hop, but at one point in time, we started generating our own, you know, with Scooby Doo and stuff like that. So I just kind of want to know how that transition happened over there and what were some of the cues and things we found out we might not be privy to as far as the information.
So I think as creatives, we all have to choose how far back or what context are we going to give to the story, right? And for Paco Son, for the Afro beats, I knew my audience. I knew who I wanted to reach, and I wasn't going to tell the story of Afrobeat or like tell people Santiago de Cuba is right near Jamaica and Haiti, and it's a over 90% black part of Cuba. You have to come to the screen like already with some basics. You already, if it's about hip hop, you already have to know, okay, the South is different than New York. You know, so I'm not gonna take you all the way to the back. I'm gonna show you some new things and hopefully give you some insight that you didn't know before that now you want to rediscover. What excites me the most is like in the film when they're bringing old traditions and songs that may get lost and they're remaking it and making it contemporary, so the kids right now that aren't even thinking about the continent are thinking about their connection to Africa, but they're listening to it and they're remembering the stories and the songs and keeping it alive. Then you go and start to uncover. Sometimes my point is to give you an input and then come and discover the rest.
I also say, as far as like knowledge goes, and they acknowledge like gaps and everything, I think it's really important to also acknowledge that knowledge is very selective and history is selective in what it tells. And so something that I've been really considering thinking about is what is the narrative that's been told and what other narratives exist, and trying to find where I can get that narrative, but it hasn't been told. Because like, even if you think about American history and all sorts of stuff, like things that we've been told that aren't the truth, you know, all sorts of stuff, like, and that's why we have filmmakers as well. That's why we're here trying to create films that tell the proper narratives, but also when interviewing, when doing something, when you're, whatever film you're doing, I think it's important to consider all of the different narratives for that one thing and trying to push yourself to like expand yourself outside of the one narrative that you're coming into the project with, because you might find halfway through the project that there's a whole other, you know, part side of history that you never knew that influences whatever the subject is, and you might have missed that entirely by making your film if you don't step out of your own narrative. And so, yeah, I think just acknowledging that knowledge is not as concrete as we think it is, because not all of the knowledge is being shared, not all the knowledge is being passed down. And I think as filmmakers, as creators, as storytellers, it's our job to find those other narratives, whether it's in our own families, ourselves, whatever, and exposing those.
Any questions? Okay, we'll take these last two and then we'll.
When I start the nonprofit, well, I have a nonprofit first off, but when I started the nonprofit, a bunch of people told me it couldn't be done, it wasn't going to work, you get out the naysayers. We was going into our first parade, and I looked around and I seen, well, most Cherokees appear to be white. Most of them that are identifiable or in the minority, just like the black Cherokees. But I looked around and there's me, there's a white Cherokee, there's an identifiable Cherokee. We have a white dude that has no Indian blood. This country is out of it now. A Mexican dude from Mexico. I'll help me build this float. And at that moment I said, hey, this might work. I might be able to do this. When was that moment for each of y'all?
So when I would, remember I said I started this as an oral history project. My very first person I interviewed was an individual in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. And I don't know if anyone was familiar with Mound Bayou, Mississippi, but it was founded by the former enslaved individuals of Jefferson Davis' brother. And I interviewed Mr. Herman Johnson, and I went down there, and Mound Bayou was a historically black town. And we literally sitting in the middle of town. This is before we started doing the actual documentary. This was just a oral history project. I went back down there to interview for the documentary. And he says, do you know why they call this Mound Bayou? And ignorant to the fact, I'm thinking Bayou, I'm thinking Louisiana. Yeah, just kind of put to, that's just what I was thinking. And I said, no. He said, well, this was all under water at one point. He said they literally dug different trenches, formerly enslaved individuals, to drain out the whole town, to dry it up. And then they built the schools, they built the banks, they built all these things. So I'm getting chills, right? Because I'm like thinking about the manpower, I'm thinking all these different things. And then so when you said the aha moment, I'm like, and because I went in trepidation, because I'm a counselor. Who's going to respect me as a filmmaker? That's what I was thinking, right? But at that point, I was like, you know what? If these individuals had fortitude to be able to do all these things, being formerly enslaved, using their resources, put everything together for themselves to literally build a town, then I gotta be able to do this. I gotta be able to switch it from an oral history project to an actual documentary. So that was like my aha moment, was sitting in the spaces where formerly enslaved individuals were, ancestors were, and just looking at the magnificent work that they did hand by hand, building bricks in the mud and building these bricks to create this whole town. So for me, that was my aha moment. Like, you know what, this can be done. I don't need to look at we can't be monolithic, right? We can't be one thing. None of us are designed to just be one thing on this earth. We all have multiple talents, just if you tap into it or not. So for me, that was my time to say that I can do this. And that's
Man, I'd say all the no's, all the, like you say, can't do it, all the naysayers, and then producing something at whatever level that you can, and then getting love, and knowing that it is needed in the world, regardless of it's not ready for television, it's not, and then just using that as your first step, and just it adds more fuel to the fire. And the next thing you know, you look back in 15 years again, you produce so much, however many documentaries, and you're dedicated to it. And I think it wasn't necessarily an aha moment. It was an investment, knowing that this is what I want to be doing with my life and feeling good about it.
I would say I think my aha moment actually came after I finished filming it, because I knew what I wanted to do. Like, I started the project like way earlier that year, and even after I filmed it, I was still like, I don't like this, and I was like, I'm not getting to where I wanted. I didn't think that I got out of it what I wanted at first, and then I remember the first screening that played during my program in Germany. This German man came up to me afterward. It was like almost in tears, which you don't really catch that with German people with almost in tears. But he was talking about how the film like really resonated with him and how it made him think about his own family history and stuff about the Holocaust and his family. He was talking about were German and like they did some bad stuff. And he just had like a real heart to heart in that moment. And I thought like if my film like made him think something, and like I didn't think that it would touch him in that way, I was like, well, then in that case, if this film can do that, what other films can I make that will do that? And like, how can film be used to reach like people as far away as I'm from Detroit to this German guy, and so that's, I would say, it's my aha moment more for like my career, like knowing that that's this is what I want to do.
So this could be for all three of you or whomever wants to answer, but you all are very skilled, obviously, in what you do by going through the process of creating these very moving and independent films. But they also contain very typical history about the past. And my question is, how do you all mentally and emotionally prepare yourselves for going into that space? Because you just don't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm gonna make a film on race and reconciliation, or, you know, the roots of hip hop, or looking at, you know, an interracial, generational history. That's not something that anybody just chooses to do just on a whim. So when you're going to enter into that space, I would assume that you all have to really guard yourselves emotionally and mentally for that prior to entering into the discussions and into that space, because the film making can take well up to a year, if not more. And then the editing that goes into that, and so it's, I'm sure, very tiring, and it gets very stressful. So, you know, also what do you do to continue on to keep yourselves in a very positive mindset, mentally and emotionally, so you can continue on through the filming process, and then, you know, then you're out in the marketplace showing your film. And then obviously that also has its own set of challenges when it comes to emotional and mental health. So what kind of techniques do you use? And for anyone who's sitting in the audience that is in film or wants to go into film or just is very involved with these topics, what do you all recommend?
It was very hard. Like, it was also like the making of this film was hard because that was also my first time being out of the country, like other than Barbados when I was a kid. So like, it was definitely a hard process. And so something I did, I meditated like a lot, like every day. I really tried to make sure I got my mind right spiritually, which that's, you know, that's a hard thing to do. We still try to do that. But I tried to pray a lot. I tried to like really put myself into the mindset of like Catherine, and try to really like connect with her on a spiritual level. And I also, when I was in Germany, I went to therapy while I was there to talk about these things, because it was such a hard topic. And I think all of that, like just being able to talk about stuff. So I think therapy is a really great thing that people need to do more of, because it's literally a space where you can just talk for hours about whatever is going on. Like that's what we need. And I think also being around other filmmakers, because I was around like my documentary group, there were other filmmakers, we all were making films, so that we were all able to talk to each other about our challenges and stuff. So making sure that you have a good support team. And then meditation, and I think therapy, it's always to keep your mind in check as you're going through these difficult kind of films.
Not so much in this last film, but these are relationships like over 15 years, and then I start shooting. So I'm not just showing up, and so feel a part of the community, and that we're going through it together, so we're healing together. My new film is about Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and so you're dealing with a lot more loss and a lot more trauma, and so it's really important that, you know, I would have, he's not usually, he travels with me, the people that were filming and that we created this together, that they come and that, for me, it's like sometimes the first time people see themselves outside of themselves. And for me, the first time that was happened in Ghana, just a society that was so different than the one that I came from. It's like the fish doesn't know they're in water until you take them out. And so I feel like if through film, sometimes that can happen for people, and it's important to surround yourself with them and be on this journey together, and that it's not siloed, that you're not going through this alone. And I would also say spiritually, like I have a practice in Puerto Rico to try to go to the ocean every day and just sit with the ocean and give my mind some of that free space that it needs for me to touch base with myself and connect with the universe.
Yeah, I saved Austin. I left corporate America. No offense for anyone that's in corporate America, but I don't think I would be able to do these films if I was in corporate America, because that was killing me inside. I know it was. I was just having a conversation with my homeboy back there, how corporate America was just eating me up as far as the creativity, as far as just anything different. It's like what Stephen mentioned earlier today, just the cyclical cycle of just doing the same thing, right? Just the top, putting on your creativity. So I believe that leaving those specific job spaces and focusing on my passion helped more. But I think that it was even tougher for me because I'm a therapist. So in the daytime, I'm in the school system, going to see kids. And then after that, I'm in my own office, seeing adults. So I'm in there all day. Oh yeah, absolutely. I got one. So, but it's kind of like how you go into it, just being very optimistic and saying, you know what, this is going to be healing for both of us, because I'm able to sit in front of you and glean information, and vice versa, regardless of who it is that we are, and we can help heal each other. And that happens. I think that happens on a lot of different occasions in which you're focusing on the humanity. And I think that if you go in with the concept of this is the human thing to do, and we're here for each other and support each other, then things work out. They've worked out well for me doing that. But definitely saging, kind of taking control of my career, you know, took less money, a lot less money, but I'm in a way better mental space than I was when I was working at that job, which has, I think, afforded me the ability to go in and do this without having all that extra stuff on top of it. So that's kind of what it's like me.
Stephen is currently taking a picture. Oh, here he comes. He's making his way here slowly. Well, on behalf of the KSU Library System, we'd like to thank you guys for coming out. This was a great panel. And that was Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen, for creating this space for us.
I'd like to thank you all for again coming to the Dining Lounge. This is the second time we've done this here. So it is definitely a labor that does not go unpunished. But it is definitely worth it. I definitely appreciate you all going to this sustain here and being part of it. I'd like to also acknowledge David Hales for Julie Cook, who couldn't stay with us because she actually lives in North Georgia, so snow is even worse. And also Cameron Sadiq, who was also assisting us all day. Matthew. And also, I would like to just say, you know, it's important to voice your discontent. It's important to say that things aren't just, that justice is demanded. It's good to protest. It's good to stand up for oneself and one's identity. Equally so, when we say, you know, we protest against the things that we don't like, we should also stand for the things that we do and the things that we do support. And so everybody here is a testament to that. And that's also the vein in which this event is built upon. So I definitely appreciate you all willing to stand up and send that same level of energy towards supporting this event, as well as your respective perspectives dealing with these different issues. Lastly, and most importantly, I would like to thank my wife, Angel, not only for her contribution to the symposium in terms of her presentation, but also essentially being my cohort when it came to developing a lot of the underlying theoretical components to this symposium. Staying up way past everybody's bedtime to discuss, like, hey, does this layout look okay? What do you think about this movie? Do you think we should put that one in too? I don't know, I think this is too much time. So just thank you for everything. I couldn't thank you with that, we are done. So I do hope that everybody registered. Did not still register, correct? And so we have contact information, we give alerts for upcoming symposia, different events. Darian's itching up. Am I running out of time? And lastly,
Presenters that are still here, we have 3 posters over here. We'd love for you to sign, so if you could do that. They're over there. Also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Dividing Lines or Lines Dividing on Twitter. We'll fix that at some point, sorry.
and also thank you to our volunteers, Bonnie Hampton, Kathy Rexlander, who's been taking tons of photos all day. I don't know who's going to be editing those things. Thank you. And also Jennifer Jacobs for marketing and we'll have to say trip home.